This is going to be totally different. So if all of that made sense to you, this likely will not. This is the light duty technical portion of the talk. Great stuff these guys are doing in Austin, and we all need the heavy duty technical dudes behind us. Appreciate what the work they're doing. I'm with Fairview Industries. I've been in the parcel business for about 35 years, so probably before Pablo and Brandon were born. And a lot of the tech when we first started out was, you know, not quite abacus, but on the borderline of being relatively primitive, which is fine because it's not about the technology, it's about the data and it's about the institutions. So my focus is not on the programming as much as it is on the data itself, how that data comes into being, and then how it's used by various organizations. So our job as subject matter experts that know a lot about parcel data, as opposed to how to reprogram it, is to take what is very complex and make it simple. Now, if Brendan thinks the census data is complex, wait till he meets parcel data. Census data are actually very well structured, very well documented, very formatted, and nationally consistent because it has a national mandate to be collected. It's driven by the Constitution and it's governed by Congress in terms of the scope and what is collected. Parcel data, on the other hand, has none of those characteristics. Parcel data is only mandated by local governments, and there are a lot of them, and there's a lot of approaches to it. So this is going to be kind of a little bit different than what we've seen already. What I want to talk a little bit about is our challenge of making the complex simple is let's talk a little bit about parcel data. So parcel data at its very lowest is a record of a transaction. So the transaction might be reflected in a deed, a survey, it might be a measurement, that might be legal call. It also contains information on the tenure system and the rights and interests that are contained within that parcel of land. Parcel data are very personal, right? So when I talk about my parcel, I'm talking about my parcel. It's a very personal data set, and it's characterized in terms of people's response to it and how people use it and how people react to it is a very personal bias. So it's complicated because of that personal characteristic, but it's also personal because of the nature of what it's defining. I'm going to speed this up. I'm going to get as quickly as I can. I know we're running short on time. The next level of parcel data is what I call assembled data, which is data that has interpreted all of the individual parcel transactions that are reflected in surveys and deeds and documents, and sometimes even not recorded information. There are a lot of places where it is not even recorded, and we have to go look for it. But the parcel mapper comes in and assembles that information and makes a single map for a jurisdiction. And similarly, federal agencies do the same thing. So the Bureau of Land Management, the Bureau of Reclamation, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, the Department of Defense, all of those various agencies, there are 12, 14 land agencies, they all make their own parcel maps by assembling individual surveys and measurements to contain a representation of what they have to manage. So much like counties contain that data, so do the counties. The next level up is aggregated data. Aggregated data is where we have added some level of standardization. So beyond the fact that standards are great, everybody should have one, this is the level where standards are great, we should all share one. So at the federal agency level and at the national government level and at the state level, we see that states have aggregated the parcels from all of the various sources into a standardized data set. Now, remember that they're aggregating data that's been collected by the local government, so there will be gaps. If the local mandate that created the parcel data was tax parcel mapping, then any parcel that is not taxed is likely to not be in the holding. A lot of local government data omits road information and road right-of-ways, and I've got a blog post on that you can check out on the that will show you how they have that concept of the disappearing road. So let me just keep going here. This is the state data. This is the an inventory that we maintain on an informal basis on the nationalcad.org website that we try to track how states are doing in terms of aggregating their data into a standardized data set. If it's blue, it's probably partial. If it's in the shades of greens, they have a full data set of some characteristic that may or may not be updated, but generally is updated at some level. And if it's in kind of a pink or purple, then there probably is not much information about parcel data, particularly at the statewide level. But what we're trying to do is give you an indication of what you can find in the US states if you were to go look for their information. And I kind of include DC as a state, even though I know it's not a state, but it should be a state. It's not a state, but it is part of the fabric of the United States. And then when we move from the individual states, we move into what we call curated or nationally aggregated data, which is what I'm going to term a national parcel polygon for now. So the idea here is to have national parcel polygons that reflect the state source, and then the state source would reflect the local source. And this is a reflection of an effort that was done in the spring and the summer. This was a 100% volunteer effort, no money exchanged hands. All anyone donated was their skills, their knowledge, and their computing resources, which is not insignificant, but is not dollars. And through this volunteer effort, it was nobody's primary job. It was everyone's after 5 o'clock job. And this is sort of the data set we arrived at. And through this effort, we have actually established a couple of things. We've established that it is possible to aggregate the United States' parcel polygons at a national level and to have it be fast enough and usable at some kind of level. We have ascertained that we can identify a potential steward, if not an actual steward, for every parcel in the United States. Whether that steward is actually collecting the information, we may or may not know. But we can at least identify who the steward should or could be. And we can also identify pointers to that information. Through that process, we've ascertained that there are as many parcel polygon formats as there are jurisdictions almost. Not quite, but almost. We have ascertained that providing the linkages is going to be very complex. We have established that we cannot take 51 REST point services and bundle them as a single map. Each REST point service has a different coordinate system, a different set of parcel attributes, a different set of frequency and aggregation. And so creating that bundle of REST services as a single REST service was overwhelmingly difficult. So the data are going to have to be collected into a single database of some type with some sort of extract, transform, and load, which I'm sure there's a 3-letter acronym for, but some sort of a process for that. So as we talk about these things, one of the things I like to talk about is it's not just the data and the institutions, but it's the people that drive those institutions. So there are varying skill levels at each level, and at the very bottom, at the most fundamental, not the bottom, but at the most fundamental level, we have the requirement to resolve and establish land descriptions. So that's typically the role of the land surveyor or the geodesist in the Register of Deeds that records that information. But this is where we are taking the intent of the transaction and translating it to the ground, or going back in time and finding previous intent and interpreting it and bringing it to a mapped representation. This is where the map meets the ground. This is the reality. This is the life blood of the land ownership in the United States. Not all maps are going to reflect all things on the ground. By definition, a map is going to be a generalization of that. Now, I know the latest term is digital twin. I've been around long enough to hear every terminology you can imagine for this, but if we want to call them digital twins for now, we'll call them digital twins. But it's basically a digital abstraction of what's on the earth. From what has been done by the land surveyors, we abstract, consolidate, and combine that information to create a jurisdiction-wide map. When we do that, we're going to have some gaps and overlaps. We're not going to have consistent representation necessarily, but the parcel mappers are required to do that interpretation to present a map that can be used for decision-making And when they do that, they're going to go ahead and link that data to other data sets, to zoning, to the real estate tax system, to crime, to addresses, to all the other data sets that are persistent across the local government or whichever jurisdiction is doing the maintenance. The skill sets required here are the GISP, a data science programmer, web skills, and you've heard that from Pablo and Brendan. That's the language they're speaking. I'm speaking the lower level language. I'm down here at the abstract, consolidate, and combine language, the remove and establish language, right? I'm a registered land surveyor and a professional engineer and a GISP. I'm at the bottom rung. Those guys are the heavy duty technical dudes. They're up here at the top rung along with Matt. And then we take that information one more time and we aggregate it into a multiple view. So when you finally get up to that upper right-hand corner, when you finally get up here to this map, now you have what Pablo characterized as open data, standardized and easy to use, right? It's not that the other information wasn't there, it's just that it's so complex and it has so many nuances that ultimately affect how well that data can be used. And Vince, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. I mean it in good faith. I don't mean it in a bad sense. But this is what happens to us: is we create a national map that has all the polygons for the United States represented here. And the first question we get is, yeah, but can you show me the restrictive covenants on all of the parcels south of the Mason-Dixon line, and which of those restrictive covenants mention race? No, we can't. We're just trying to get a national polygon so you can see the pattern of ownership and you can drill down and get the details from the locals. So as soon as we present an oversimplified view, then people immediately assume that all of the richness of the local data set is going to be available at this national level, right? So I have a national map that is created on the web. Can you see every monument type on every single parcel in the United States? No. But at every single level, one thing we do need to have is we have to have accountability. You have to be responsible for what you're doing. This is not a hobby. This is a job. This is important. You have to have the authority to doing what you're doing. It's an authoritative data set. You have to either disclaimer the data set or be able to state specifically what is the legal standing. You are dealing with people's rights and interest in land. You cannot treat it like an overview vegetation map. People can be harmed, land can be taken, tribes can be robbed of water rights, things can happen with land rights, and so it has to be accountable. It has to be current. It has to at least have some statement as to its currency and the frequency of update, and it has to be a statement of the resolution and the intended detail. And those 5 things have to occur at every level, at every single level. And if they don't do that, it's not parcel data. That's von Meyer's law. If you cannot do accountability, authority, legal standing, currency, and resolution at every data set, then you don't have parcel data. You have something else. Something else. I don't know what it is, but it's not parcel data. The way we did this was and Matt would have to address the language. I'm not going to get into that, but there was a lot of maneuvering that had to happen. And then there was a whole bunch of JSON and GeoJSON and Python and Lord knows what languages that changed hands to get it from the data sets to a web map. And it was done in the Esri platform as well as in the Mapbox platform. I liked them both. They're both good. They had good and bad characteristics of both. But one of the things that's really interesting about this is that the publicly available data is on the left-hand side. So let's start with state aggregate and state source data. So what we had was a situation of high public demand, incredible pressure, high consumer demand for the data, but very low resources. There was no federal dollars available to do this. There's no national program to do this. There's not a national imagery program. There's a national floodplains program. There's not a national parcels program. There's not a national survey program. There's not a national land ownership program. There's a national census program. There's a national wetlands program. There's national soils program, but there is not a national parcel program. So we have low federal resources, high public consumer demand. What happens when you have that characteristic? Solar energy, high consumer demand, low government resources. What happens in that situation? The public sector fills the gap. right? That's what, you know, we call kind of capitalism. So the public sector steps into the void and does the infill and fills the consumer request because the public resources are low. The public funding is low and the consumer demand is high. Von Meyer law number 2. And so what happens in this model is we have to have infill for states without a contributor source. And that's the role that Jerry and his team, Regrid, provided. Did a great job of it. I really like their data. I like the way they do their infill. I like their community spirit. I like their willingness to step forward and make that happen. So that's a public-private partnership. It's a public sector for-profit company that's stepping into the void to fill a large public need because they're good public citizens. That's not universally true, but in this country for all companies, but it's true for Regrid. So what we have is a big tent, right? And we always like to talk about tents. It's a kind of an American thing. We talk about tents. And so we have the national parcel polygons, and then underneath it we have this aggregated data, and then we have the individual federal. So we have PADUS, the public, the PADUS. PADUS is a data set where federal lands have been aggregated into a national view. We have aggregated state parcel data. We have federal agencies' individual data. We have locally assembled data, and we have the transaction data. So our big tent is including 6,700 mapping organizations, 23,000 assessing groups, 40,000 agencies, 40,000 agencies. And so we have a lot of people involved and a lot of agencies involved. And just to come back to the theme of, is this AI? One of my favorite sites I'm going to put in the chat here is Classic. And I want you to go look at that, and it says, "Will robots take my job?" Right? So that's the fear of artificial intelligence, is will a robot take my job? So I put in some of those jobs that are related to parcel mapping, and it's, if you're an appraiser or an assessor, you have a 91% risk that a robot's going to take your job. If you're a surveying and mapping technician, there's a 6% risk that a robot's going to take your job. If you're a land surveyor, there's a 67% chance that a robot will take your job. But if you're a GIS professional, it's 38%. That means, in my simplistic interpretation of this, is that at the GIS professional level, 38% can be done by artificial intelligence. 38% can be done by a robot. That's a much smaller percentage of what can be done by a robot than if you're assessing or appraising. So just that's this concept of making it simple. So certain aspects of parcel mapping are pretty simple, and they can be automated and they can be AI'd. Other parts of this are just not ready for AI yet. So I just want to emphasize that it's a big tent, and it's going to take all of us to make this happen.